Kato Kalin shot to fame 20 years ago during the O.J. Simpson murder trial. He was the famous house guest staying at O.J.'s place. He was also a star witness.
O.J. Simpson's story was supposed to end with a verdict, but what if it didn't? Nearly 30 years later, disturbing details and buried truths have come crawling back to the surface. From secret conversations to long overlooked evidence, a darker picture is finally taking shape. And it's not the version the world was shown on courtroom TV. This isn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It's about what's been hidden, ignored, or quietly erased. Because the mystery of O.J. Simpson, it might finally be solved, and the truth isn't good. A homicide timeline that doesn't lie. June 12, 1994, started like any other quiet Sunday in Brentwood. The summer air hung still, the streets calm, and Nicole Brown Simpson had spent the evening out with family and friends. But before the clock struck midnight, her life and the life of her friend Ronald Goldman was savagely cut short. The scene was gruesome. Both had been stabbed repeatedly just outside Nicole's home, their bodies discovered in pools of blood on the walkway. And from the very first report, the timeline began whispering a name: O.J. Simpson. The connection wasn't just coincidental, it was disturbingly precise. Nicole's Akita had been heard barking and crying around 10:15 p.m., according to neighbors. Jeevers, it was a frantic, piercing sound that drew attention. Some believed it was the exact moment Nicole was slain, and when Goldman arrived, he too may have walked into the chaos. That's the moment the horror began. And just minutes earlier, O.J. had returned home from a late McDonald's run with Kato Kalin, his guest house tenant. A 10-minute drive separated O.J.'s Rockingham estate from Nicole's home. It wasn't just plausible, it was perfectly timed. This wasn't speculation. The clock kept ticking, and the pieces kept falling into place. At 10:25 p.m., a limo driver named Alan Park arrived at O.J.'s estate to take him to the airport for a red-eye flight to Chicago. But something was off. Park rang the intercom, no answer. He waited and rang again. Still no response. But then he saw someone. A tall, shadowy figure, approximately 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds, walked across the driveway toward the house. O.J. would later emerge, claiming he'd just gotten out of the shower. But by then, it was close to 11 p.m. Meanwhile, back at Nicole's home, detectives were already beginning to piece together a violent scene. A left-behind glove, soaked in blood. A dark knitted cap, bloody footprints leading away. The bodies were found around 12:10 a.m., but by then, O.J. was already on a flight to Chicago. The disturbing synchronicity between the moments of silence at his estate and the sounds of death at Nicole's home was too close for comfort. Then came the blood evidence. Not just at the crime scene, but at O.J.'s own residence. DNA tests would later confirm that blood found on the glove behind Kato's guest house, on O.J.'s socks, and even on the driveway matched Nicole, Ron, and O.J. himself. A fresh cut on his finger, noted by police after the homicides, added another layer of suspicion. All of it painted a picture too vivid to ignore. And yet, in the courtroom, this evidence was not the final word. The defense unraveled it through doubts, improperly handled samples, chain of custody missteps, and accusations of contaminated procedures. What should have been a straightforward narrative, time, place, blood, became a fog of debate. Technicalities buried what seemed undeniable. But for many, the clock never lied. The timing, the distance, the missing minutes, it all pointed to one man. Still, the question lingered. What would an innocent man do next? And what would a guilty man do if he'd just done the unthinkable? But the timeline alone wasn't what finally began to crack the foundation of O.J.'s innocence. It was what he did after the homicides that turned suspicion into something darker. The bag, the Bronco, and a deadly secret. It was supposed to be the moment of justice, but it turned into the most surreal police pursuit in American history. On June 17, 1994, 5 days after Nicole and Ron were found dead, O.J. Simpson was officially charged with their deaths. But instead of surrendering, he disappeared. What followed was a slow speed chase that played out live on national television, with millions of stunned viewers watching O.J. ride through Los Angeles freeways in a white Ford Bronco. Inside that Bronco was not just a fugitive, but a man in visible distress. O.J. held a gun to his own head as his longtime friend and former teammate, Al Cowlings, drove. On the phone with a detective, Simpson pleaded his innocence, sobbed about Nicole, and threatened to end his life. It was the dramatic unraveling of a man many once saw as invincible. But it wasn't just the emotional breakdown that raised alarms, it was what they found in the Bronco. Police recovered nearly $9,000 in cash, his passport, a loaded handgun, a fake mustache, glue, and a change of clothes. It looked more like the getaway kit of a man on the run than someone preparing to surrender. But amidst all that, one thing was conspicuously absent: the homicide weapon. The knife used to stab Nicole and Ron was never found, and this discovery, or lack thereof, would become one of the most haunting aspects of the case. That's when questions began swirling around a small, mysterious bag. Kato Kalin, who had been staying in the guest house on O.J.'s property, gave a curious account of that night. As O.J. prepared to head to the airport for his late-night flight to Chicago, Kalin helped him load bags into the limo. But there was one he was told not to touch: a small, unassuming duffel. O.J. was uncharacteristically protective of it. Kalin backed off, confused but compliant. That alone wouldn't mean much, except someone else saw it too. Limo driver Alan Park later testified that he also saw Simpson with a bag over his shoulder, distinct from his luxury Louis Vuitton luggage. And what makes that even more critical is what witnesses say happened at the airport. A man named Skip Junis, waiting to pick up his wife, claimed he saw Simpson get out of the limo, holding that same cheap-looking duffel. O.J. walked toward a trash can, unzipped the bag, pulled out something long, and dropped it inside before casually heading into the terminal. That bag was never seen again. No one retrieved it. No report was filed. And whatever was in it, whether it was nothing or the homicide weapon, disappeared into the Los Angeles waste system without a trace. Now ask yourself this: why would a man heading to Chicago for a scheduled business trip throw away a duffel bag in a public trash can, alone, unobserved, when every other bag was properly checked in or carried on? And why did no one around him remember ever seeing that bag again? It wasn't just suspicious, it was almost surgical. In a case where everything else, the DNA, the timeline, the motive, was being debated in court, this bag quietly vanished from the narrative. But for many, it represented the one piece of evidence that could have closed the case definitively. If the weapon was in that bag, then O.J. didn't just walk away from the homicide scene, he threw away the truth before boarding his flight. And it wouldn't be the only time he came close to confessing. If O.J. really was hiding a weapon, why didn't he just admit it? Because, as we'll uncover next, some of his closest friends say he nearly did. Confessions, dreams, and fractured friendships. Long after the verdict, when the media storm had faded and the courtrooms were emptied, the people closest to O.J. Simpson began to speak. Not reporters, not jurors, but friends, allies, the very individuals who once believed in his innocence and had stood by him during his most public trial, slowly began to change their tune. And when they did, what surfaced wasn't just secondhand suspicion. It was chilling, it was personal, and in some cases, it sounded dangerously close to a confession. Mike Gilbert had been more than O.J.'s sports agent. He was a friend, a confidant, someone who had helped manage his image and business deals for over 2 decades. After the trial, Gilbert remained close to Simpson, staying silent through the controversy. But something shifted over the years. In 2008, Gilbert went public with a revelation that rattled even hardened skeptics. He claimed O.J. had confessed to the homicides. According to Gilbert, the confession came late at night, when Simpson was drunk and emotionally unraveling. He wasn't weeping, he wasn't dramatic, he was cold, detached. Gilbert recalled the moment with brutal clarity, describing it as unmistakably real. O.J. hadn't said the words, "I slayed them," directly, but in the way he spoke, and what he left unspoken, the truth, had been obvious. Gilbert's claim wasn't meant to win fame. He'd been part of O.J.'s inner circle, and now he felt haunted by it. So haunted, in fact, that he wrote a book detailing every uncomfortable detail of that moment. But he wasn't the only one. Ron Shipp, a former LAPD officer and personal friend of O.J., also broke ranks. Shipp had initially testified on Simpson's behalf, but over time, doubt crept in. And then came a conversation he couldn't forget. In the days following the homicides, when O.J. was under pressure from the police to take a lie detector test, Shipp asked him point-blank why he was hesitating. Simpson's response was disturbing. "I've had dreams of slaying her." Shipp later recalled how cold and eerie that moment was. This wasn't just a nervous slip, it was a glimpse into O.J.'s mind, a window into his guilt, buried beneath years of denial. Psychologists often refer to these kinds of statements as leakage, when the subconscious can't help but surface through confession, even if cloaked in metaphor. To Shipp, it didn't sound hypothetical. It sounded like remorse, twisted and warped into a dream. What made that moment even more sinister was Shipp's prior knowledge of O.J.'s relationship with Nicole. He had seen the bruises. Nicole had shown them to him personally, confiding in Shipp after one of the many domestic violence incidents. Photos, swollen eyes, bruised cheeks. These weren't rumors. They were documented instances of abuse. When Shipp confronted Simpson about it, O.J. didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. That silence, for many, said everything. It established a pattern not just of physical violence, but of control, intimidation, and volatility. O.J. hadn't just dreamed about hurting Nicole, he had already done it, repeatedly. The man who once ran through airports in commercials as America's football sweetheart was now, to those who knew him best, a stranger. Not a charming celebrity, not a wrongfully accused icon, but something darker. And when even those closest to you begin stepping back in fear or regret, it stops being speculation. It starts becoming revelation. But even that isn't the most chilling aspect. Because, as we'll see, O.J. himself would one day write his own version of how it all happened, in terrifying, graphic detail. The confession in disguise. By 2006, O.J. Simpson had already become a symbol of one of the most polarizing homicide trials in American history. Public opinion remained split, not just between guilty and innocent, but between those who believed in the justice system and those who believed justice had failed. So when word spread that Simpson was releasing a book titled "If I Did It," the reaction was immediate and explosive. On the surface, it was pitched as a hypothetical narrative, but what lay inside those pages didn't feel hypothetical at all. From the very first chapter, the book rattled readers with its cold precision. O.J. didn't speak in vague what-ifs. Instead, he painted scenes with such eerie detail that many wondered how he could possibly know what he knew, unless he had been there. The positioning of the bodies, the weapon used, the supposed moment of confrontation, and even his mental state leading up to the act were all described with chilling clarity. It didn't sound like speculation. It sounded like memory. What stunned legal experts and the victims' families was how closely Simpson's words echoed the actual evidence, details that were never released to the public during the original trial. He spoke of the path leading up to Nicole's condo, how the scene exploded into violence, and how someone blacked out during the slaying. These weren't the words of a detached narrator exploring a legal theory. These were the words of a man reliving something he couldn't quite keep buried. And while the book technically included disclaimers, distancing it from an admission of guilt, the tone said otherwise. At one point in the book, Simpson even introduces a fictional accomplice named Charlie, who he claims urged him to walk away. But then, in the hypothetical account, O.J. says he blacked out. When he came to, Nicole and Ron were dead. The knife was in his hand, and Charlie had disappeared. It was a scene straight out of a psychological thriller, except this wasn't fiction. This was written by the only man who could have known exactly how that night unfolded. The backlash was so fierce that the publisher initially canceled the book's release. But in a legal twist, the rights were awarded to the Goldman family as part of their $33.5 million civil suit. When the book was finally published, the title was graphically altered, with the word "if" reduced to tiny print, while the larger, bolder title simply read, "I did it." For many, the symbolism was undeniable. Even with its profits redirected to the Goldman family, the book remains one of the most controversial pieces of post-trial media ever produced. Some viewed it as O.J.'s ultimate act of arrogance, flaunting his knowledge, taunting the public, and rewriting history on his own terms. Others saw it as a subconscious confession, the moment when a guilty man couldn't hold the lie any longer. Because for someone who had spent over a decade claiming total innocence, O.J. was suddenly far too comfortable describing a scene of two brutal homicides in his own voice. And not just the violence, but the emotions, the thoughts, and the disturbing calm that followed. To this day, legal scholars debate the book's purpose. Was it a legal loophole designed to clear the air? Or was it a guilty conscience disguised as fiction? Either way, it revealed something undeniable. The line between truth and story had blurred, and O.J. was now the only one controlling the narrative. Some believe he didn't, and one theory points directly at someone even closer to him than Nicole ever was. The shocking Jason Simpson theory. For all the suspicion surrounding O.J. Simpson, there's one theory that refuses to fade, one that shifts the spotlight from the accused to his own family. That theory centers on Jason Simpson, O.J.'s oldest son from a previous marriage. It's not part of the official investigation, nor was it presented in court. But private investigator Bill Deere has spent over a decade gathering documents, conducting interviews, and building a controversial case that suggests something truly unsettling. That Jason, not O.J., may have committed the homicides, and that O.J. covered it up to protect his child. Deere's theory isn't built on hearsay alone. It's laid out in his book, O.J. is Guilty But Not of Homicide, where he claims that Jason, 24 at the time of the slaying, was mentally unstable and prone to violent outbursts. According to Deere's findings, Jason had previously been arrested and placed on probation for attacking his boss with a knife. He'd also been diagnosed with intermittent rage disorder, a psychological condition that causes unpredictable and intense outbursts of anger. Add to that the detail that Jason had allegedly stopped taking his antipsychotic medication just before the homicides, and the picture begins to shift. Bill Deere didn't stop at medical records or past incidents. He tracked down several of Jason's former girlfriends, and their stories painted a disturbing pattern. One woman claimed Jason had once thrown her into a bathtub during a violent outburst and threatened her life. Another said he had pinned her down and cut off her hair in a jealous rage. These weren't isolated acts of frustration. They pointed to a person struggling with violent impulses, particularly when feeling emotionally cornered. But what truly elevated Deere's theory from fringe speculation to serious curiosity was Jason's alibi, or lack thereof. Jason claimed he had been working at the time of the homicides, preparing meals at a local restaurant. But when Deere obtained the time card from that night, it didn't add up. The card was handwritten, a major red flag, especially considering the restaurant used an electronic timekeeping system. Why would someone forge a handwritten time card unless they had something to hide? And then there was the matter of the knitted cap. Photos of Jason before June 12, 1994 show him wearing a dark knit cap nearly identical to the one found at the homicide scene. After that night, those images, and the cap itself, seemed to vanish. Combined with Jason's physical stature, his known proficiency with knives, and his troubled history, Deere believed Jason had both the means and the temperament to commit such a brutal double homicide. So where does O.J. fit into this? Bill Deere theorizes that O.J. arrived at the scene after the fact, either discovering what Jason had done or receiving a call from his son in a state of panic. Rather than let Jason face homicide charges and potential life imprisonment, O.J. took control. He cleaned up. He moved evidence. He shielded Jason the only way he could, by becoming the target himself. To many, this theory sounds far-fetched, circumstantial, lacking the kind of hard forensic evidence that would link Jason directly to the crime. Critics have called Deere's work sensationalized and built too heavily on speculation and second-hand reports. And it's true, Jason Simpson was never named an official suspect, never charged, never questioned in the same aggressive manner as his father. But Deere's theory still struck a nerve. It suggested a deeply human motive, a father protecting his child, even at the cost of his own freedom and reputation. And it would explain a lot. O.J.'s bizarre behavior in the days following the homicides, the Bronco chase, the almost calculated decision not to turn himself in, the overwhelming silence on certain questions. If O.J. didn't commit the homicides, but knew who did, and that person was his son, it would cast the entire case in a horrifying new light. Yet even this theory, if true, does not clear O.J. of involvement. At the very least, it implies he was an accessory after the fact, and at most, it still places him at the heart of the cover-up. In either case, the mystery deepens. What ultimately kept O.J. out of prison wasn't his son or lack of evidence. It was something far more systemic, rooted in race, power, and the shattered trust between a city and its police force. Race, police, and a historic trial. By the time O.J. Simpson's homicide trial began in 1995, America wasn't just watching a courtroom drama. It was standing at the crossroads of race, justice, and national identity. The city of Los Angeles was still raw from the 1992 riots, ignited by the acquittal of 4 LAPD officers caught on camera beating Rodney King, a black motorist. The images of that brutal assault and the fact that it went unpunished left deep scars. In that moment, faith in the justice system among many black Americans shattered. So when O.J., a beloved black celebrity, stood accused of slaying his white ex-wife and her friend, the case quickly became more than just a question of guilt. It became a symbol, a flashpoint. And Simpson's defense team knew it. They didn't just defend O.J. the man, they made him the embodiment of every black defendant who had ever been targeted, mistreated, or railroaded by the LAPD. The courtroom became a stage not just for legal arguments, but for a broader narrative of institutional racism. At the center of this firestorm was LAPD Detective Mark Fuhrman. He was the officer who found the infamous bloody glove behind O.J.'s Brentwood estate. The glove that prosecutors argued was worn during the homicides. But then came the tapes. Fuhrman had been secretly recorded years earlier, spewing racist slurs over 40 times in a single conversation. And worse, he had lied under oath when asked if he'd ever used such language. Suddenly, the prosecution's star witness had become the defense's greatest weapon. If Fuhrman lied about his past, could he have lied about the evidence? Could he have planted the glove out of bias or revenge? Could a man with openly racist views be trusted with the integrity of the investigation? To a jury composed primarily of black jurors, the questions weren't just hypothetical, they were personal. The trial had shifted from one of homicide to one of motive. Not whether O.J. had a reason to slay, but whether the police had a reason to frame. This wasn't a matter of guilt or innocence in the traditional sense. It was about reasonable doubt, and the defense played it masterfully. They pounced on every procedural error, DNA samples that were mishandled, vials that were improperly stored, evidence that had been left in hot vans. It wasn't that the evidence didn't exist, it was that its integrity could be challenged. The strategy worked. Despite blood evidence linking O.J. to the crime scene, despite the cut on his hand, the trail of blood, the glove, the sock, the defense cast just enough shadow to blur the facts. In just under 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict that would echo through history: not guilty. For many, the trial's outcome was a moment of vindication, not for O.J., but for black Americans who had spent decades watching the system fail them. To others, It was a stunning miscarriage of justice, one that exposed how far emotion, history, and public perception could override hard science. But the story didn't end there. In a civil trial 2 years later, one without the same burden of proof, O.J. was found liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. The jury ordered him to pay $33.5 million in damages to the victims' families. It was, in essence, a legal contradiction, not guilty in criminal court, but responsible in civil court. This duality left the nation split. Did O.J. walk free because he was innocent, or because the system had something bigger to prove? Race, rage, and media spectacle had all collided inside that courtroom, and for better or worse, they changed how America would see justice forever. And yet, there's still one haunting loose end, one piece of evidence that never resurfaced, and may still hold the final truth: the homicide weapon. What happened to the knife? In a case overflowing with theories, testimony, and media noise, one absence speaks louder than anything else: the homicide weapon. The knife used to slay Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman was never found. Not during the investigation, not at trial, not even in the years that followed. That isn't just a curious gap in evidence. It's a black hole in one of the most heavily scrutinized homicide cases in American history. And despite everything we know, that missing blade continues to haunt this case like a ghost no one can lay to rest. Unlike other elements of the case, gloves, blood samples, footprints, DNA, the homicide weapon was never accounted for. Prosecutors presented theories. The defense cast doubts, but no knife was ever submitted as evidence. And yet, the wounds told a clear story. Medical examiners concluded that both Nicole and Ron were stabbed repeatedly with a single-edged blade, a weapon capable of inflicting deep, precise injuries. It was not a crime of confusion. It was close, personal, brutal. So where did that knife go? We return to a moment that's been mentioned but never fully resolved: the mysterious duffel bag O.J. carried on the night of the homicides. Multiple witnesses gave strikingly similar accounts. Alan Park, the limo driver who picked up Simpson at his home, noted a strange, small bag that O.J. clutched protectively. He said it stood out, not because of its appearance, but because of how O.J. acted around it. He wouldn't let anyone else touch it. Kato Kalin, who helped load O.J.'s bags that night, noticed the same thing. While assisting with O.J.'s usual luggage, he reached toward the small duffel, only for O.J. to stop him abruptly. Kalin later recalled how unusually guarded Simpson became over that one item. And it wasn't a designer bag like the others. It was cheap, nondescript, easily forgettable. That's what makes what happened next so disturbing. At the airport, a man named Skip Junis witnessed O.J. carrying that same bag. He wasn't holding it casually. According to Junis, O.J. walked away from his luggage handlers, approached a public trash can, unzipped the bag, and pulled out something long. He dropped it into the bin and walked off like nothing had happened. The implications are chilling. Trash bins at airports are emptied frequently, often before dawn. If the homicide weapon was inside, it may have been incinerated within hours, before police even knew what to look for. No search warrant could retrieve what no longer existed. No forensic team could examine evidence that had been intentionally erased. Years later, this moment takes on new weight. Because if that duffel bag truly held the knife, and O.J. knowingly disposed of it, then the mystery isn't a mystery at all. It's a choice. A deliberate, precise action to erase the most incriminating link between slayer and crime. And in doing so, Simpson may have unintentionally confirmed what millions already suspected. Destroying the weapon might have helped him evade conviction, but it also painted a clearer picture of guilt than any glove ever could. Not just a man with something to hide, but a man who knew exactly what needed to vanish. New interviews and re-evaluated testimony continue to point back to that missing knife, not as a tragic oversight, but as a deliberate cover-up. The final piece, the object that could have sealed the case. And for all the questions left swirling in the aftermath of the verdict, this one might be the most damning. Because sometimes it's not what's found that reveals the truth. It's what never turns up at all. So maybe the mystery isn't really unsolved at all. Maybe the truth has been right in front of us for 30 years, and we just didn't want to believe it. The O.J. Simpson case may never be formally closed, but the weight of public evidence continues to grow heavier. Was it O.J. alone? Did someone help him? Or was he covering for someone else? If this video challenged what you thought you knew, make sure to like, comment your theories, and subscribe for more deep dives into unsolved cases and shocking truths. And don't miss our next video, where another so-called closed case might just be anything but.